Prelude 2, Section 2, the Renaissance, 1450 to 1600. What caused the Renaissance, right? The word Renaissance means rebirth. A number of things happened. All right, in 1453 was the fall of Constantinople, the Eastern Roman Empire. With the fall of Byzantium, that's what the Eastern Roman Empire was called. We refer to it as Byzantine. A wave of Byzantine refugees fled to the Latin West, carrying with them the classical and Hellenistic knowledge that provided additional impetus to the burgeoning humanism of the Renaissance. So the Eastern Roman Empire had preserved, to the most, for at least somewhat, the knowledge and the writing that had taken place in Latin, and then some of it had been converted into Arabic. And so if you lived in a big city that had thousands of people, and suddenly that you live with this danger that it could be taken over by the Arabs, and finally it happens, you get your stuff and you get out, because it's turns into an unstable, dangerous situation. So thousands of people of knowledge and great success took with them as much as they could to mainland, or well, not mainland, but main part of Europe, as opposed to Constantinople, which is right on that Bosporus Strait. On one side is Turkey, and the other side is Europe, and Constantinople was on the European side. So this big migration of people was one of the things that triggered the Renaissance. But it happened before that. In 1439, Gutenberg invented the printing press, where instead of writing a whole block upside down and then being able to print as many pages as you want, he used the letters in blocks that could be moved around upside down and made into a page of prose, right? That can be printed out as many times as you want. And then the next day you could rearrange the letters and have new news. So this was a huge development in as far as progress, just as important as the development of the computer and the dissemination of information. So that books could be produced in a very inexpensive manner. And so suddenly many people could own books, as opposed to books that had been copied by hand, had taken hours and hours to do this. And so they were expensive and not very many were available. So if you do a book with a printing press, you could make many. But even more importantly for our course is they then were able to print music. And this music was available inexpensively, right? So it created a whole new audience of people to buy music and to play music and perform music. And as well, you could, before this, you had to travel someplace and hear a concert, and you'd say, oh, that's something new music that I've never heard before. But you heard it once and you go back. Maybe you heard it a couple times. But if you were there and you're able to buy a copy of the music, you could take it back and you say, wow, I see what's going on here. I'm going to try and use that idea. So the dissemination of information and ideas was just very important as a result of the invention of the printing press. One of the things that Martin Luther was involved with, and he was also an important element in the change from the Middle Ages to the Renaissance, is he encouraged the printing of the Bible, and it was in one language of German dialects, right? So there are many different. And this helped to unify the groups of people that lived in the land, the German people to have one language. And it was because of the book and the Bible. And why would you print the Bible? Well, it's because I can sell them. Everybody wants that. Wow, I'm going to buy a Bible. And so it also unified the German language to a large extent. And 1492, another big end of the Middle Ages developed by the Renaissance, was when Ferdinand and Isabella, right? They hired Christopher Columbus, or he, solicited their help, and he started this wave of colonization of the New World. We've talked about that. Martin Luther, 1517. He didn't intend on starting a new religion. He was a priest, and he just would hear people talk and about complaining about things. And he said, well, maybe we can make some changes. How about if we just bring it to the authorities' attention? And he wrote this list of 93 theses, I think he called it theses, and he printed them on the church main door. And this caused people to say, wow, no, we think that's a problem we want to fix also. And the church didn't fix it, so they went and started their own religion called Lutheran religion, right? And it was the first non-Catholic, non-Roman Catholic church that diverted, and it caused the Catholic Church to have a reformation, right? To have meetings and say, oh gosh, why is everybody leaving our church? The parking lot's empty. Nobody's buying the raffle tickets. So they changed things in hope to stop people from leaving, but not changing too much. So it didn't, well, it did change things. But I don't know if it created a resurgence of the Catholic Church. Right? The breakdown of the authority of the Catholic Church with intense questioning and exploration, the concept of humankind's place in the world. What's this all about? An emphasis on human values, human life, and accomplishments rather than religious doctrine and the afterlife. It's like, Mom, I want to be a comedian. Why? Because it's fun and people like it. Oh, but somebody always gets hurt when you have comedy. Global exploration, right, as a result of one explorer after another. So this rise of secular power, as opposed to everything in sacred, right, meant the rise of secular education. And again, this printing press was this wonderful dissemination of knowledge. Visual art, we'll see here, started to have perspective as far as line. Fascination with art and literature of ancient Greece and Rome, because they did have 3 dimensions in their art and sculpture. Rediscovery of the ancient Greek and Roman culture. Humanism, right? It's about in life and enjoying what is life about. How can we exchange our emotions and talk about these emotions? The ancient Greek ideal of music as a power that can change nature and move souls became more accepted practice, as opposed to just something that was functional to make you humble and communicate and with the other world, whatever that is. Printing press. Music had to be memorized, but now it could be copied. Created an atmosphere ripe for religious revolution. Why do we have to go to confession? Can't I just talk to God? Why do I have to tell a priest? This is what Martin Luther questioned, and many other things. So, the ancient Greeks and Romans, they had no figure like Christ to dominate their thinking. So they focused on rhetoric, right? Education, poetry, morals, and philosophy. Plato, Socrates, these, Pythagoras, Archimedes, people that really set a lot of permanent examples in humanity, right? Nor the transient regarding the Middle Ages, the transient, worthless figure of humankind is described by medieval theologians, right? But rather a more man independent, intelligent, adventurous, and capable, rather than we are just worthless. We are nothing. That gets old after about 500 years. So here, Temptation of Christ 11:25. This is a comparison of art in the Middle Ages and the Renaissance. Middle Ages were flat, no perspective, no dimension, sacred. 1338, effects of good government. So this is a secular painting, right? And there is a perspective there with the buildings. So there's a mixture of the dimension of the 3 dimensions and the 2 dimensions here. I don't know, there's so much 3 dimension here, but certainly in the building, wow, somebody went crazy with their ruler. Middle Ages, what's going on here? This is a very famous painting, or part of a painting. And here we have some leader, and apparently this is a church setting, and they all have books, and perhaps they're singing. But what are these people doing? And these people, oh my, too much wine. But this teaching or some kind of lecture is taking place. There's more written on the internet about this. Another example, one giant page, because it's too expensive to have many books. So one page, handwritten, can be seen by many monks. This is Renaissance. The style is different. Here we have robes. Well, these are church people, but this is secular, right? So there's a difference here. And we see they have musicians over here entertaining. These people are apparently dancing somehow, and these people are breakaways from the group. And another picture of musicians and people most likely dancing. In the mid 1480s, this is Renaissance. Again, the learning to respect the body in a different way as far as nudity. And is it something we should hide and be ashamed of, or is it something that is made by God and it's just an amazing beauty, right? And not necessarily sexual. It's just all the body is amazing, and it's so fascinated painters, right? So this is style. 1512, Italian, 2 angels. What are they thinking about? (1503), Leonardo da Vinci. This is the Mona Lisa, very famous painting. We'll see this later. Pet. What kind of pet? They had very exotic pets, and apparently were able to pay for them, and somebody would capture them and bring them back and sell them. Right? How much of a market was that? Probably bigger than you think, and it made a dent with the population of these animals, I'm sure. Michelangelo, again, the body, right? And this is from 1504. The statue is 17 feet tall. Oh my gosh. But what a meticulous sculpture to look so lifelike. And It's human. This is what the beauty is. 1517, the Reformation starts with Martin Luther. And then it's interesting, right? By 1540, the Roman Catholic Church has an important beginning of a meeting called the Council of Trent. And they have different councils. I think that might have been the next council was like one of the ecumenical councils in the 1960s and 50s, where they decided to abandon the requirement that all masses throughout the world be said in Latin, and they changed it to be in the vernacular. So this was 18 years, this study of what should we do. Counter-Reformation objected to imitation masses. So they started to clean things up because as far as music, people were complaining that it was too much music. And this was what Martin Luther complained about. It's like, this is like going to a concert and people were having fun. They're using songs that are like, Rolling Stone songs and then singing it in church with in Latin for prayers. And it's like, I can't get no satisfaction. It's like, wait a minute, we got a contradiction going on here. So they made these changes, the Council of Trent, and it changed music forever as far as professionals abandoning working for the church because the church put too many rules on it. And they said, wait a minute, this is old stuff. We're not interested in writing this kind of music. And they started to write madrigals, which were secular music. There was this movement from sacred music to secular music. And then this is the 1600, because the Renaissance, 1450 to 1600, the invention of opera. So there was this sweeping activity. 1580s, Shakespeare, Queen Elizabeth I, the defeat of the Spanish Armada, 1588. This is Renaissance stuff. The Counter-Reformation, the Council of Trent objected to too much polyphony, too many instruments in the church. The singers had a bad attitude. Well, you believe that, right? Okay, 1529, the Ottoman Turks' unsuccessful siege of Vienna in 1529. Remember, I made reference to this, marked the beginning of a long decline of their empire, the Turks. It also stopped the advance of Islam into Central and Western Europe and ensured that the Christian rather than the Muslim religion and culture would dominate the region. Wow, what a turn of events. The Last Supper, Leonardo da Vinci. This again, Renaissance stuff. How much perspective is involved here? Wow, right? And with the table also, even everybody pointing to the central figure. Renaissance. I don't have the date here, but it's a very famous painting. And in here is a mirror, and if it was a good lighting and a clear painting, clear picture, we could see that their reflection is in the mirror. So how much three-dimensional perspective is there if their images are in the mirror? This is from a giant piece called the Ghent altar piece, and each one of these is a wooden panel. And there are many panels, but by Van Eyck. Again, singers in a church, all reading off the same music. What quality of books that were made, right? These are not, poorly made. The soldiers, right? This amazing, beautiful, didn't have photography, but so if you were interested in armor, you would study this and figure out what's going on here. I don't know how many panels there are. Oh, we got a sacrifice going on here with the lamb. Clergy over here, clergy over here. books. Well, these are all of the panels, right? Ghent altarpiece. Each one is separate, and they together look like this. We use the words consonance and dissonance. Right? We talked all about the technical, the theoretical parts of this stuff. But it developed in this time. This is the Middle Ages, right? 600 is when Alfonso the Wise lived. There was plenty of work for musicians by, in the Renaissance, for the church, for the city. And they had guilds of musicians, and so you had to be admitted to the guild. Bach, J.S. Bach, was in a guild. All his family, grandfather, uncles, were all in the guild, music guild. And people had money, so they were able to pay for live music, pay for music to be purchased. Here we see this again. Amateurs playing music from a book, all reading the different instruments. She has a singing, right? Flute, lute in the concert, 1530 to 1540. So they're telling us that women did perform music. Look at the clothing, the styles. Renaissance, as opposed to the Middle Ages, you see paintings with robes that give away Renaissance. Although there are pictures of Middle Age activity with their clothes as well, so you can see the styles. Okay, so let me go to the 10 things about the Renaissance, 1450 to 1600. My 10 things. Number one, the Middle Ages ended and was kickstarted Europe into the Renaissance as a result of several things, right? The Black Plague. You see, the Black Plague, 1350. How can that, half the people dying be a good thing? Well, it's like this, right? A lot less traffic, a lot more food perhaps to eat. Plenty of parking, higher pay because they couldn't get enough people to do the crops. So people started to be more creative as far as how they could grow crops. They had the ability to grow other crops rather than just the staples like grains because they didn't need to grow so much. So they could grow fruits and vegetables. And then prior to this, it made no sense to grow food to feed an animal when you didn't need animals to do the work because you had plenty of labor. So now you have a shortage of labor. So then, and you had more food, the choices of food, so you could feed the animal. And then you could start to eat meat. You could use the animal to be more productive. This is what are some of the things that came out of the Black Plague. Again, other things that led about the Renaissance, right? The end of the Middle Ages, the Black Plague, invention of the printing press, the fall of that Constantinople, right, which brought all this information. That Crusades from even the 1100, they brought back books and knowledge and ideas. Constantinople, after a 53-day siege caused by a mass migration to Central Europe, or caused a mass migration, taking with it the knowledge of the Greeks and Romans, as well as all that they gathered they could from the Arabic knowledge of science, mathematics, and medicine. So the Renaissance started in Italy because that's where the money was. It was going from the merchants during the late Middle Ages and the church. And so it was connected. The church had the money and they probably were buying things. And so merchants became wealthy because they were trading with the church. And then it leads one thing to another. That's why Michelangelo worked for the church because they had the money. Wealth was in the hands of a new class of people with the merchants, the mercantile business, and of course the church, which was a patron to the arts. The use of currency rather than the raw trading of goods became the norm. The church and the bankers now were in control. The Medici, right, in the family in Italy. The Renaissance promoted the rediscovery of classical philosophy, literature, art, and music. A priest, Martin Luther, changed everything with his 95 Theses of 1517. He stood up to the church, and actually a very important individual that stood up to the church and with words was able to protect himself. And although he was excommunicated, right, stood up to the church and was excommunicated by the Pope and condemned as an outlaw by the Holy Roman Empire. Among other criticism of the church, he found the use of indulgences to be offensive. You know what indulgence, where you could, buy, pay the money, and they say, okay, we'll say extra prayers for you. And not only that, if you haven't, your aunt died and she is in purgatory because she wasn't perfect then, so she has to spend some time in purgatory. If you give me some money, I will say some prayers to help shorten her time in purgatory. Wouldn't you like your Aunt Minnie to go to heaven sooner? Oh, yes. Indulgences. So Martin Luther was a seminal figure in the Protestant Reformation. Martin Luther himself translated the Bible into the German vernacular. His beliefs included allowing the clergy to be married. Wow, not a bad idea. The church's reaction to the Reformation was to have the Counter-Reformation. So the Protestant was a Reformation. You need to change. And the church says, okay, we can change. Enacted by the Council of Trent. An ecumenical council took place in Rome. Following the Council of Trent, professional musicians, the use of organ and polyphonic singing were criticized and limited. Parody masses where they used outside music were based on music that was secular and sensuous. This was now banned. The council said that the text should be clearly heard and be understandable as far as the message of the text. The council claimed that music was not to entertain the listener, right, the Catholic Church, but what was important were attitudes of reverence and worship during the Mass. Well, this discouraged creativity. After the Council of Trent and the Counter-Reformation, the center of avant-garde music moved from the, you know what avant-garde means, right? And it's a military term, to mean the front line. So in arts and technology, we say avant-garde. It's like they're the new creators, right? So the center of avant-garde music moved from the Catholic Church to secular music, from the Mass, a sacred form, to the madrigal, a secular form. The greatest musicians from all over Europe had written hundreds of masses, setting in the text from the Kyrie, the Gloria, the Credo, the Sanctus, the Agnus Dei, parts of the Mass, the polyphonic music, wildly creative music. The Council of Trent put an end to that. The madrigal, which is based on combining great poetry and music by using word painting, became popular, and the focus to composers and music consumers alike. In the Renaissance, it's like, I can buy that music cheap and we can sing it as my friends, and that's what happened. During the Renaissance, instrumental composition was based on choral style and was not music instrument idiomatic, meaning that nowadays, or in the modern times, you can do certain things on the violin that you could not do on a bassoon. So you wouldn't expect either one to do that. And during the Renaissance, everything was this choral attitude. This is the way we take choral music and we could perform it on instruments. So they didn't say, well, I could do this fancy thing. It's like, no, just nice, just like if it was being sung in polyphony. And so there was instrumental music performed, but they were really performing a vocal style on instruments as opposed to a unique instrumental style that occurred in the Baroque period. So the same music, right? Books of music were printed and they were expected to be performed by instruments or voices. There wasn't a separate book written for instruments. As far as music, the Renaissance starts with wild and crazy polyphony by the likes of Josquin. We'll study his music in the sacred music genre, and ends with wild and crazy polyphonic music by the likes of John Farmer or Gesualdo. We'll hear some of their music. in the secular music genre. Again, it moved from sacred music to secular music during the Renaissance. In earlier Renaissance music, for example, Josquin, the emphasis was on the polyphony and the meaning of the words was not the priority. In sacred music, in the late Renaissance, because the church required this, the words were expected to be heard clearly in polyphony and hopefully understood. For example, the music of Palestrina, which we'll study his music. So because the church said, we can't understand the words because everybody's on different vowels. They're singing and they're singing and it's alleluia, and they're not on the same syllable. I understand what they're saying. So Palestrina said, okay, we'll do polyphony, but I'll change and then we'll just have no more than, you might be on le, and so there's not too many things going on at once, and I could still understand the words. And Palestrina, and then the church said, that's cool, Palestrina. We'll pay you a big high dollar to write that kind of music, and he did. The madrigal in the late Renaissance was secular and extremely popular by amateur singers and composers alike. Their emphasis was on the combining of great music with great poetry. You write a poem that's about, snowboarding, and I'm going to make the music sound like we're snowboarding. And this is what the combination of music and poetry was with the madrigal. It was fun to do because we're singing about stupid stuff and love, and I can make the music be entertaining and fun to perform, and a surprise with how the music matches the words. So when we're talking about climbing up the mountain, the music is going to go up. When we say go down into the valley, the music is going to go down. Right? I made that example earlier about the crooked straight. This is word painting, right? And the madrigal was written in the vernacular. In England, it was in English. In Italian, in Italy, it was in Italian. And oftentimes employed a double entendre. You know what that means, right? The madrigal started in Italy, where it was sung in Italy, and then English and Italian. During the Renaissance, great ornament painting, when sculpture was created by Da Vinci, Michelangelo, and dozens of others. What a wonderful period of time. And if you ever have a chance to see an exhibit of Italian or Renaissance painting, which we have at the Museum of Art and the old museum on Montana Street downtown, really cool collection right here in El Paso. Number 9, the colonization of the New World took place during the Renaissance, mostly by the two world powers, Great Britain and Spain, intentional or otherwise. Within 100 years of Columbus's 1492 discovery of America, the population of the New World declined by 58 million people. Spain, as a world power, began its demise when the Spanish Armada, the Navy, was defeated by the British in 1588, largely to a storm. And so suddenly the British were a dominant power, and Spain lost their world power, or it began a major decline. One of the reasons was because the British Empire and colonization, they set up ways to trade and make money. We could trade with the colonies. They have tobacco, and we like to smoke tobacco, so we'll trade with them, and this took place. But the Spanish were more interested in conquering and looking for gold, and they did find it in many cases, but once they had found all the gold they needed to find, or could find, it was an economic strain rather than a benefit to have colonies. I wanted to say something else here. Oh, this is very interesting that we talk about world climate, and this is a fact that, so in 1492, right, and then 20 years after, let's say, and these 58 million people disappear, and so the amount of land that was being used to grow crops declined, and forests grew back throughout North America, South America, Middle America, and it started to consume so much carbon dioxide by 1600 early plus, right? We're talking like 100 years later. In Europe, there was a big freeze, and for several winters, it was unusually cold. and the water between Denmark and Finland froze solid in the wintertime because of this deep freeze. And as a result of depopulation and reforestation, it works. So, number 10, the Renaissance period involves a philosophical adjustment with respect to the teachings of the church and a questioning and oftentimes rejection of church dogma. So, it's this rebirth, the movement from sacred activity to secular activity. This is the change in the Renaissance. So, that will end our prelude number 2. Part 2, Section 2 on the Renaissance, 1450 to 1600.